Hi guys, so let's now have a look at protectionism, and in this lesson we're really going to focus in detail on tariffs, okay? So let's check out tariffs and the role they play within an economy. Okay, so if we just consider a normal demand and supply diagram, in this model really we are just considering the fact that we've got domestic supply available and domestic demand, and we'd see our market equilibrium, of course, where supply equals demand. Okay, now we need to introduce world trade or international trade. So if we consider international trade of homogeneous goods, i.e. goods that are very, very similar, if not unique, okay, then perhaps those goods are actually grown in many different countries. Let's consider an example such as cocoa or coffee, that we can actually import those goods at a much, much lower price than, of course, the UK economy can actually produce those goods. And we would then have the supply from the world economy looking like so. Why is this perfectly elastic? Well, I've drawn it as perfectly elastic because I'm assuming, firstly, yes, it is a homogeneous good and therefore it can be produced in many, many different countries. And as such, it means that we have a lot of choice in terms of where we actually choose to import that good from. Okay, so in such a scenario, let's just run through the dynamics we can see here. So we've got the world price here. We've got Q1 here, we've got Q2 out here. Now, with free trade, with no protectionism imposed, we can see that actually there will be a big increase in consumer surplus, okay? A big increase in consumer surplus, because the consumer surplus and economic welfare will enable supply to equal demand right out here at Q2. Okay, so as such, we can see that consumer welfare is greatly increased here. And we can see that this here, between Q1 and Q2, is our potential level of imports. Okay, there may be some domestic production, although that's maybe unlikely with coffee as an example there, but it might be wine as another instance. Okay, so we can see that actually there will be some domestic production, because these domestic producers are very efficient producers, and they can produce goods at very low unit costs. Okay, now let's just remember what a tariff actually is then. So a tariff is a tax on imports. Okay, so as a tax on imports, it has the impact, of course, of raising supply costs. So as supply costs are raised, we can see we are on the world supply plus the tariff. Okay, now look what happens in terms of the dynamics within the marketplace. Now we can see that actually the quantity that will now be imported will be reduced. We'll call that one Q4 and this one Q3 here. And we can see actually that domestic production will increase. The level of imports is now only between Q3 and Q4. So therefore we can see that the tariff has actually enabled us to restrict the actual quantity of imports coming into the economy. So to that extent, it's actually fulfilled what we would like. Okay. However, there are a number of problems here. So, firstly, we can see that we have these producers which now can re-enter the market. These domestic firms can now re-enter the marketplace and actually start selling their goods in the domestic market, because they're just about competitive enough when they're protected under a tariff arrangement. So in such a scenario, of course, we would then see domestic production increase from 0 to Q3. And let's just highlight our world price plus the tariff here. Okay, so we've got world price plus the tariff there. We can see there's an increase in domestic production, but the problem here really is the fact that these producers should not be producing these goods. They should have reallocated resources elsewhere, because they shouldn't have been protected by a tariff and protectionist method, really, in a free market. So therefore, there is going to be a loss of what's known as dynamic efficiency. A loss of dynamic efficiency within the marketplace. Okay, so there's a loss of dynamic efficiency, but in addition to this, we can see that the actual consumption level is reduced. So the consumption level is also reduced. Now, that means that we see a loss of consumer surplus. So let's just highlight that there. So we've got a loss of consumer surplus. Economic welfare, in effect, has been reduced. That's bad news. That's bad news. We don't want that, really. Okay, now, in addition to this, we can also see that there's a box highlighted in the middle, which I've just depicted in red here. And this box in the middle here, well, that's the import plus the tariff. Now, that therefore represents the actual tariff income for the business. So we see the tariff income highlighted by this box here. Okay, so there's a number of problems under such a mechanism and lots of points for analysis and evaluation. I would also add in that it's also important to consider how easily can these firms actually re-enter the market. Because remember, they weren't operating under free trade, under free international trade. So how easily can they actually re-enter and start competing to restrict those imports and increase domestic production? So that's a point worth making. That's likely to depend upon the degree of product homogeneity. Okay, so the more homogeneous goods, i.e. if it's more easily produced like apples, then yes, you can easily start competing again. However, there is still likely to be a time lag effect between the short run and the long run domestic production level increasing. That is lovely stuff to include that. That's really precise, detailed economic understanding. Love that stuff. All right, but there we go. We see that there are numerous problems here, and we will look at a full analysis of protectionism in our next video. Thanks, guys.